Hey everybody, how you doing? I know it's been a while. Doing another briefs here, and actually doing it on my phone because as I'm learning more and more about cell phones, it seems like I can do a lot more the more I get used to and get proficient with using my cell phone to do certain things. I'm not saying they're always going to be like this, and a lot of my other recordings are going to have to be done, on the higher quality microphone and all that stuff, but we're going to try this, and this is probably going to be part one of probably a small series in this brief. The reason being is because I sort of bit off more than I could chew in really just in nescience more than anything else. I had a number of topics that I was looking at to do for this upcoming briefs, and it was really just a coin toss, literally. And I ended up on international harvesters because these vehicles have intrigued me for a really long time. For any of you that aren't familiar, I'm going to just scroll slowly here. And what I did was I just punched into a Google image search international harvester. So if they're doing this by like AI algorithm and what comes up the most or what people search for the most, you're going to see a lot of their private sector vehicles, a lot of their SUVs, maybe more than everything else they're known for, but we'll go into everything else they're known for, which, by the way, because the amount of notes on International Harvester alone had to be shared with Hannah, she's sitting in with me on this briefs so that we could try to get out as much as we can in this first one, which this first one is probably going to seem very messy because of how much information just kept sort of falling out from different places on International Harvester that I never even expected I'd find. So Hannah's here joining me. Say hi, Hannah.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah. We're using the regular mic. We've tried a few different things with the iPhone. The regular mic seems to be working possibly the best. If we need to, we might actually use a better mic as we go, but we've tried it a few times, and this is what seems to be the best so far. If it turns out not great, we might just run it through some iMovie filters after this. So while I'm talking about this a little bit, I'll go ahead and scroll through here. And again, anybody who's not familiar really needs to look at the screen at some of these SUVs. Now, I am one of those Bronco scum people who just absolutely love the Ford Broncos, early model Ford Broncos. And the thing is, once I started learning about International Harvester, I would trade a Ford Bronco for nearly any International Harvester vehicle you could imagine. These things are so fantastic, built so tough, so long lasting, that I've seen a few videos on them, read a little bit on them, and based on their specs, how they were built. Now, I'm not talking about later models because according to their story, International Harvester was begun in 1902, which is quite an auspicious career if you look at how many things that they are credited with designing and bringing to development and mass production since 1902. It is outrageous, absolutely outrageous. Because when I go into some of these lists of what they're credited with, you're going to have to admit that this is mind-boggling. And the funny thing about International Harvester that we started finding as we looked into them and started taking notes is that International Harvester, like every other car company or any other machinery company, fits the standard model of what I've called the fuzzy ears. For those of you who are still not familiar with the fuzzy ears, I started claiming some time ago, a year or two ago at least, that this idea that a lot of these, in my opinion, alt history, fake history, revised history shills were pushing. They pushed all of this stuff kind of happening along with worldwide catastrophes and other things happening sometime in the 1800s, oftentimes the early 1800s, sometimes the late 1700s. Sometimes they push it up to the middle 1800s. And what I believed is that a lot of the old world was literally just hidden from view in the early part of the 1900s. And I call those the fuzzy years. Basically, you can take it from 1900 up until what? The close of World War II. Those are the fuzzy years. Probably especially from World War I to World War II, because I believe those were the two times when this worldwide regime was changing so much. Just right under our noses. And we were concerned with what? Were we concerned with all of these things they were changing, that they would teach our children? Those children that were spoiled beyond belief in the late 40s, the 50s, and the 60s. Those were the people who were spoiled, the boomers. The ones who believed they had it so hard, they worked so hard, that everything they have, they should be able to hold, white knuckle hold, until the day they die and leave their children next to nothing, which is the standard model. Those are the people that had it soft, and they knew that once they just changed over everything in that time and kept news sources localized, separated that, cut off communications as best they could reintroduce all of this fake history to these soft-brained, spoiled baby boomers. They would accept it, and they would essentially act as the fifth column going forward. So, do you have anything to say yet, Hannah?
I was just gonna say that World War I and II, that time period, the 19-teens to the 40s, it had so many different objectives, and they accomplished so much. With those, I think one of the reasons was to entirely take over this company, International Harvester, which maybe that wasn't the name of it. Maybe they created that.
Or many companies.
Yeah, because
and put it under the International Harvester flag, right? Like General Motors?
I had no idea this even existed, really. I've never seen the SUVs until just now.
Right, and we're going to find out not only about International Harvester, but General Motors. When we started looking up ways that they could have umbrellaed these things, and by the way, I do plan on linking these various topics that I'm going to cover in briefs to the Bible, and the fact that I believe that the Bible's narrative is taking place in a world not very unlike our own, except it would have been much better, much more beautiful as far as buildings, architecture, infrastructure, vehicles. I believe that they've had vehicles from the start, maybe from the start. You see, if you're willing to believe that the great creator created everything, like all the animals, all the flora, fauna, sun, moon, stars, atmosphere, everything else in 7 days, why will you not believe that he also, or instead, one or the other, created the cities, many of the buildings, much of the infrastructure that we needed to get going? Because what did we have? I mean, the idea, this is what I was taught, was that he created everything and everything existed in a very primitive state. And then he created Adam and Eve, and then there's all this speculation where people say, well, maybe he gave Adam all the knowledge he needed to make everything, and then Adam would have passed it on to his children. Can you pass on all the knowledge that you would need of industrial design, the knowledge of plumbing, sewage, carrying water, electricity, and I can't even name it all? Can you really pass that on from generation to generation, one guy? I don't know. But I think it's entirely believable, if we'll believe the one narrative, to believe the other, that he actually gave us a lot of things and gave us ways too, like the recipe books and all of that, and watched over as we went. And human beings they're pretty industrious and smart, and they probably could have developed, but I don't think they did without a kickstart.
Why is it not so difficult to believe that he created the libraries of information and everybody has a certain skill or specific thing that they're really good at, and we work together because we have to work together to make so many amazing things. How is that not believable?
See, I don't necessarily believe that the genealogies from Genesis 10 represent all the genealogies of all people or all the genealogies of a certain race of people per se. I believe that they're in there because they represent the genealogies of people that were very focal, at least some of them, focal points of the biblical narrative going forward. And this whole thing about the primitive existence and the snake in the garden, or whatever he was, okay? The Christian identitarians would tell you he was the Jew in the garden, right? Whatever. Those first few chapters, one of the nagging problems I have, maybe not with all of the information in those first few chapters of Genesis, maybe not all of it, but at least some of it, is that going forward, let's say, okay, so from the Exodus forward, which is when Israel has a nation, okay? Israel does not forget their forefathers, and they're named over and over again: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, the giving of the law, the exit of Mitzrayim, the time in Canaan, all of that stuff. It's mentioned again and again and again and again as you go forward in the law and the prophets. But you know who's never mentioned going forward in the law and the prophets? Adam or Eve. Or how about Cain and Abel? Never.
Maybe they weren't, and maybe Adam wasn't a single person. Maybe it was just the name of a people, or a race of people, and it wasn't a single man, it was a race of men.
Perhaps. Because if that's true, it's possible that you wouldn't see them mentioned like they mention other individuals. It could have just been a certain type of man that he created at a certain time. Because as we saw, I did a study on this, talking about where the closer translation than there was no man to till the soil, it actually says there was no Adam to serve, Obed, to serve the Adamah. How do you serve them? Maybe by leading them in the right ways. I would say if there were a certain race of men all around the world who were governing other races of men in a proper way, which they are today. There is a certain race of men who govern all other races.
But
it's
not
still
properly, maybe.
Maybe not properly, but it's still that way today.
Yeah.
That would be a way to, no, today I don't think they serve them. I think they serve themselves. Why, for the most part. But that would be a way to serve them, to serve their interests. I don't think today they serve their interests, but I think that's what could have been said back then. But the idea that there was an individual named Adam and an individual named Eve, isn't that a little bit bizarre, since for the rest of the narrative of the law and prophets, a certain race of men are called Adam? It's kind of weird, isn't it?
I was just going to say one thing, that, they're supposed to be a group of men serving or leading, managing other men. But I was going to ask everybody, do you think that it should cost money to exist? Because it's been bothering me lately. It literally costs money to do anything that exists. And I don't think, for the International Harvester, I think that's why they took on this company. Because you shouldn't have to pay to live and exist, I don't think. But today you do.
Right, and one of the biggest problems is not necessarily paying to exist, but maybe the idea of what we're paying and in what way to exist. Because look, if you want food, you're going to have cattle, you're going to have to take care of them, or you're going to have grain, so you do have to do a certain amount of work, of course, right? But it's how we are paying to exist today, right? Property taxes, mortgages, anymore, they have to buy engineered seeds, engineered eggs, so they can raise Cornish cross instead of a natural chicken, and just keep going. The way we have to pay and what we have to pay with is the difference, because everything costs something, but the regime today has turned it into money instead of energy, our own energy, for whatever it is that we find to be valuable. and therein is the problem. So I think that as far as like this sort of economy that has been thrust upon us is not per se the economy we once had, unless that was one of the things that we were warned about a long time ago, developing economies like that. And it is possible that both Israel and Judah developed economies like that, as well as other nations around Israel and Judah, which were subsequently destroyed. We don't know that all the people of those nations were destroyed, but we are talking about Mitzrayim, we're talking about Assyria, we're talking about Babel, we're talking about a lot of nations that once existed that no longer exist.
They got greedy. Didn't care about their people. It didn't seem like Israel cared about its people. Not at all. They got greedy. At least it would appear that way. God had a reason to be angry with them. What was the real reason he was so angry with them?
And that's where we get into the common sense aspect of all of this, which I try to do with just about every sort of recording that I do is apply some sort of a common sense logic. Does this idea that we are witnessing in translations that we know just from the amount of studying I've done and some others have done, these translations can't possibly be correct. We don't know how incorrect and in what ways, but oftentimes when we read something, we see something that's so bizarre that just can't match what we understand that, let's say, life and culture and other things, they have to exist. We don't find them in the biblical narrative. And we have to ask, why are those things not there? And why are various concepts that are so different, why are they there instead? And could we possibly see cultures, and I'm not talking about Stone Age cultures, I am talking about refined cultures, ones refined enough to have great societies, which we see being described with the nations I just mentioned, including Israel and Judah. Advanced cultures, we can't see them existing with such foolish things as kings being able to order everybody to bow down to a statue when they hear music playing. It's the most ridiculous thing. Honestly, I think maybe if Trump came out tomorrow and said the same thing was going to happen, that might actually be the thing that could cause so many people to snap out of their slumber, because they would realize that's got to be the dumbest thing I've ever heard, unless they're so brainwashed and entranced, enslaved, enthralled.
They would do it.
By the biblical narrative that they would say, well, I mean, this makes sense in the Bible because it's there in the Bible, and that maybe they would do it. And I guess that would be even more horrifying to me than much of anything else. But on the screen, you're seeing vehicles, you're seeing SUVs, you're seeing large trucks for industrial use, you're seeing tractors. Unfortunately, you're not seeing a lot of the earlier farmall tractors, which were, in my opinion, the real bad to the bone tractors. A lot of these have actually probably been retrofit with different sorts of engine and other things. Oh, now we get into one. You'll see if I center this. So at the very right, I don't want to hit this because if it comes dead center, I'll have to blow it up, which will mess everything up. You'll see that tractor to the very right. That is much closer to the earlier models. So it's got those two wheels that are in tandem. They act as one wheel. So this is what's interesting. I don't want to go too hard into all of these models of the farmall tractors, but the earliest model I found in a promotional video was, I think it was right around World War II, or just after, when they had fit the earliest model to work on gasoline, or they said it can work on distillate, which I think might have been what they were calling diesel at the time. This was an amazing tractor. They're early tractors. And it's one reason why the more you look into what models a lot of companies had in cars, tractors, heavy equipment, and keep going, around World War II, or even if you could go earlier, were probably some of the best models. A lot of them still worked on steam, which, by the way, International Harvester says that almost everything they had worked on a steam engine, which ran, well, it wasn't a steam, it was basically a steam generator, which then powered an electrical engine on nearly everything they were producing, which I think is the best way. That's how all those steam trains ran as well. I mean, all they did with those steam trains was they put in a diesel generator, which powered, again, an electrical engine. So the early International Harvester tractors, they were only 3 wheels. So they didn't even have that little double wheel that you see in the front here. It was a single wheel, okay? And that single wheel was all guided by the user. Up front here, the clutch, the brakes, were all extremely simple, easy to get to. The clutch, I mean, all of this was so easy and straightforward, yet these early models could get so much production done, it was ridiculous. First off, they had a rear wheel base of, I think it was about 6.5, maybe close to 7 feet wide. Maybe I'm wrong on that. I think it was actually far wider than that, because it could do 2 rows at a time. That's what they were designed to do, 2 rows at a time. And I think the reason they split the wheels like this, maybe, so you could somewhat avoid doing any damage. But the thing is, if you have a wheel like that on this tractor we have at the very right center, well, then I might as well just go ahead, blow it up a little bit. And it went dark on me. Probably because it's...
Scroll up, honey.
It's probably because it's Alemanni.
Yeah, there's a...
Yeah, they put a... Okay, so I'm going to get... I have to get this Farmall real quick. Not in Alemanni. So I'm going to X that out. International Harvester. And we're going to do the Farmall. And they had about 4 models. Let me see if I can get something... The correct model on the A. I know I'm switching the screen to vertical, and I'd like to keep it horizontal.
Maybe put a date in, like early 1900s.
I probably should. Sorry. We'll see 1930s. See what we can get there. Because I want you to see the one... Nah, that's a video, unfortunately.
You'll have to do probably before 1916.
This one is close, and I think they stripped it down. But even though steel wheels can be very good for farming if it's in soil, but this model was so awesome. It had 4 different speeds. The 4th speed drove pretty darn fast down the road if you had to take it down the road. Now, I don't think that one there is a single wheel. It's still the double wheel. Is it the wide wheelbase, though? This one right here? Let's check it out.
Because not all of them are. That might be it. The one we saw in the video.
That wheelbase, it's close. But the thing is, the steering wheel isn't the same, and neither are some of the other features. So let me see just real quick if I can find another one, because they're not the easiest thing to find. They keep wanting to give me these ones with that little double wheel there instead of the old models with the single. It was just a single wheel.
You know, I noticed about that video. They
What's
showed
that?
it driving. It was so sturdy. It wouldn't topple over. I mean, it was sturdy. It could maneuver so much better.
Here we go.
Yeah, that's close to
This
it.
is very close. So let me see if I can get this. Oh, what did I do? What did I do?
Go down a little bit.
Where was I at? I just messed it up. Because I tried to make it wide. Well, okay, is that a... I don't know where I was either. So I'm going to go back, make sure.
That's the hard part about the iPhone. They're just so difficult when you turn the... That wasn't it.
They are. So I apologize about that. But I really thought they were going to give us better pictures of the old Farmalls.
Put in like 19 teens, honey.
19 teens?
Yeah, because after 1916, that's when they changed them all. First started. It's like 1915.
All right, we're going to try this again. Let me just try 1920. Okay, we're going to see a lot of them with the steel wheels, but they were, like I said, around World War II. Now they were using the rubber wheels.
These are not the old ones. They had much wider a back axle was much wider.
Like that. Here.
Similar.
Now, I know this has a double wheel at the front,
It's close.
but this is very close what you're seeing on the screen. Very, very, very close. And this still does act. Why does it keep doing that?
Because you have the X at the top that you can't reach because it's so ridiculous.
I can't?
iPhone is retarded.
Do you want me to hit the X?
No, just I don't know why it's graying it out.
I
it wasn't
don't
doing
either.
that before. We were testing it too, and it wasn't doing that.
Yeah, we did. We tested all of this, and there we go. Now it's saved. So, real quickly, I can just... And it's not saved. That's perfect. Great. Never mind. Let me just go back here.
Would you like me to try?
I'm going to hold it vertically so you can see it better. So, this wider wheelbase you're seeing, they were at least that wide, probably wider. And like Hannah was saying, you wouldn't even risk any kind of like toppling because the center of gravity in these things...
It's low.
Yeah, since they were designing them for 2 rows at a time, they would have had a low center of gravity. Plus, the great thing is this front wheel would go right between the 2 rows. And what's nice about that is now you don't only have to use it for certain jobs. Because if it's a single row with the wheels closer together, the rear wheels, this front wheel is going to be all over your crops. You can't use that, okay? They designed it specifically for 2 rows. And if you bought these tractors, these farmalls with the center wheel, the single front center wheel, not only was it a 0 turn, it had 4 speeds, which were just phenomenal. The first 3 for farming, the last one for on the road, and it went pretty fast on the road. This front wheel was not weebly wobbly. It was so well controlled. And I saw this vehicle in action. It was very smooth, very well controlled, you know, a great... And there wasn't an attachment you could imagine for the farm, for the field. No matter if we're talking about planting, pre-planting, or harvesting, or post-harvesting, there's not an attachment that you could imagine that they did not make for this vehicle. You could buy this vehicle as well built as it was and never have to buy another tractor. And every possible attachment was made for these vehicles, which is amazing to me because if this company was born in 1902, when we get into how many things International Harvester was said to have produced, how on earth could they ever have designed and put into practical use that many things? And as soon as I find a few of my notes here, because today we're mostly going to talk about International Harvester and their history, and we'll rabbit trail here and there, but who cares? And then we'll get into a little bit more of the sharp, focused things as we go after this.
I did want to note one thing. The farmer could also, it was so easy to change out parts. It was very simple to work on. So basically your farmer was also a mechanic because how simple it used to be to work on and fix or replace any parts needed. Today you couldn't even imagine doing that to a John Deere. Like, how could you fix your own John Deere? Well, you couldn't.
I can't even fix my own pickup truck anymore.
No.
It's a 2007 Ford F-150. I can't even fix that anymore. I had to have my spark plugs changed, I think it was about a year and a half ago. And I figured I was going to change them because I've always changed my own plugs until I talked to somebody who knew that engine. I have a 5.4 a 5.4 liter 3-valve V8 Triton. And I'm glad I talked to a friend of mine before I decided to change the plugs out, because that friend of mine said, you know, unless you're really good at it or familiar with those plugs and that engine, I would take it to a mechanic. Why? He said, because those plugs are notorious for breaking. There's 2 or 3 of them that are hid under certain pieces of equipment, And you're going to have to literally take off all these different pieces of equipment just to get to them, besides the fact that for, well, I don't even know how long, these car companies have been putting all their plugs underneath the coils, which is just an added bit of complexity. And I'm glad he talked me into it, because I've got a feeling, and this was somebody who knew their way around an engine. They had done a lot of work for me in the past, and I said, hey, well, do you want to just change them? I said, I can pay you this much, and I can pay you this much if any of them break per, and they no, we'd rather not. I actually called 2 shops that said they didn't want to do it, and I finally had to take it to the Ford dealership, the Ford dealership were okay. They gave me a base price, and they said it'll be $90 per broken plug. So think about how much it costs just to work on cars and trucks these days, much less the, complex combines and other farm equipment they make.
The farmer could literally have a part in and out within a few minutes and just keep on farming. It was that easy.
An old farm I lived on, he had a matching pair of those old Ford tractors, the simple Ford tractors from like the 50s. And I had a guy come over and take a look at them, and he quoted a price for fixing both of them, and it was less than the price he quoted for fixing the John Deere the guy had there. Of course, he opted to go with the John Deere because all of the extras that he had were all for the Deere and wouldn't work on the Fords. And I thought,
Wow.
I thought he should have had the Fords fixed, but I mean, he had to have something running. So still. So here's the thing. The story, let's say from International Harvester, which AI is going to spit out, is that yes, they were founded in 1902. Apparently, they took a terrible nosedive in the 1970s, along with a hell of a lot of other companies. Remember, folks, when was the last ship on the Great Lakes sank, the last cargo ship? 1975, the Edmund Fitzgerald. And that's why I believe Gordon Lightfoot didn't just come up with the idea to write that song. I think he was commissioned. And it was a memorial because that was going to be the last big cargo ship they sank on the Great Lakes. So many of the copper mines closed up around that time, around Lake Superior. So much went downhill in the 70s. Huge recessions for anybody who was alive during that time, during the 70s. So this is when they said that they really tanked, and then they finally went out of business and broke up into a number of other companies in the 80s. I think the 1980s is probably the decade that marked the solidification of everything that this regime had been working on for, if it was the 1980s, for the past 70, 80 years, right?
Well, and what do we find out about International Harvester and, what was it, GM? That GM literally, well, among other companies, we basically financed and built all of the machinery and vehicles for Nazi Germany. And then as soon as we entered the war, we cut off ties after we had supplied them, so that they would be able to have a war in the first place. I find that interesting. Does anybody know this?
So everybody hears the big stories, the big boogeyman stories about how Henry Ford, that stinking racist Nazi Jew hater, how he was supplying Germany with materiel in the way of vehicles and whatnot for the war. But they never include, so did GM and so did International Harvester. They also don't include the fact that these 3 companies all had plants in Germany and abroad. They also don't include the fact that one of the pieces of wartime equipment they say International Harvester produced, almost every single one of those models, it was like an all-around military vehicle that they produced, that almost every single one of them was shipped to the USSR under the Lend-Lease Act. So I don't even know if we have one of them left as proof of this, because there's this story that we get about all of the private sector vehicles, cars and trucks, and ag and industrial and even private sector machinery, that almost all of it was put on hold during World War II.
Between 1916 and 1941.
So it started in 1916?
When they started retool everything.
Because what they say is the one I keep hearing is like, for instance, in the Preston Tucker story, they say that Preston Tucker was so successful with his cars because he was designing new cars back in the 40s when the big three weren't designing anything. They say the big three stopped designing anything new just before the war, and that they did not release a new model until, like 10 years after the war? World War II. I'm saying World War II. So there's this huge, gigantic window in time when not one new thing was produced. And that's where I think is the sort of the weakness, the chink in their armor, is that there's this huge vacuum of time where like nothing new was produced. And then they say, after the war, they started releasing all of their old models again, and then they started designing new models maybe around 10 years later. And none of it seems to make sense. There's so many things about it that make sense, I can't even begin.
Well, basically they admit, because they say between 1916 and 1941, that they were not producing anything, but that they were building military vehicles and equipment for Germany during that time. And then they cut off ties after, basically, once we entered the war. That's when they cut off ties.
And that's not even half of what they say was going on. What they say essentially is not just for Germany, but in general, and they'll actually say more for the United States, because they don't want these. Like I said, those other companies, they do let us know about Ford because Ford is their. I got to go back here. Ford is their whipping boy. Their whipping boy racist that they can always equate with the Nazis, right? But they never tell us about GM and the GM umbrella of what they produce or own it's mind-boggling. Kind of the same with Ford, but not as extensive as GM. And then International Harvester, which we're going to get into. Things about International Harvester and who supposedly designed their tractors and so on and so forth. They don't bring these things up because I think the waters would get so muddy and they would have to come up with so many explanations that they would rather not. So just keep that in mind. In the United States, or probably North America, so probably US and Canada, most of the manufacturers of all of these things that I've mentioned, not just private sector, but also ag, industrial, all of that, it all came to a standstill as far as new designs and production. They say, as early as Hannah said, sometimes the 19-teens, and sometimes they say it was as late as the 1930s. It kind of depends on who you ask and what company it has to do with, or what certain vehicle or whatever. But this whole story is very, 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 very messed up. So when I'm going to wait on what they dissolved into in the 80s, but remember, a lot of their stuff was made at steam when they first started out. So they would have had to have essentially either retrofit more of their various vehicles than can be imagined for gasoline or diesel, which that even, when you look at how many things they produced, would have been a monumental feat. But let's just keep that in mind. So International Harvester was also a company that seemed to sort of come to a standstill before at least World War II, because they claim that a lot of their stuff was designed in the 30s. So they would have said they came to a standstill around the 30s as far as new designs, except for the war, and we'll look at that a little bit. And then again, started back up, except the designs and what they were releasing after that were not as good. They started out with things that everybody would have remembered, but they quickly degraded their tractors, at least through the next three models that they produced. Hannah, do you have anything to say before I start on their wartime efforts?
Yeah, I was just going to basically say, They claim that they came out with certain models in the 30s. I don't know if they actually did or not, but that's what they claim. But by 1941, according to what they say, that was their first model that they released that was diesel. So they basically completely eradicated the steam power by 1941. It was completely, I think that's their goal. And they first debuted their diesel tractor in 1941. And from then on, it has been nothing but diesel and petroleum.
Or gasoline, right.
Yeah.
Or gasoline. Yeah. Because that one that we were watching, I think that video was produced in the 50s. And it is a promotional video for this early model, except now it's running off gasoline and diesel, which we know it was probably retrofit because it's one of their earlier models. So we have every reason to believe that model probably once existed as a machine that used a steam engine to essentially run the entire thing electrically. And we've kind of stumbled over so many vehicles, whether they be private, industrial, farm, that do that very thing, including trains. They, again, have a generator that, powered by steam, that generator essentially allows the entire engine, the rest of the vehicle, to be ran electrically. So when you think about like anything that runs electrically, it is all pretty much like direct drive kind of situation. Very different sort of situation than gasoline and diesel, right?
Yeah, and one of the things that they notably did during the wars is they hired quite a few women while the men were all fighting. Well, I think it was very easy to hide what they were doing because they compartmentalized everything. The women were more focused on, oh yay, we get to work, we get to get paid, you know. And I think they were pushing that in the media, and so what they were actually doing at their jobs, it didn't really matter to them very much. They hid a lot of what they were doing because, I'm sorry, but I think the women were just so happy to work, and they were just calling them heroes. I think like today they're calling nurses heroes. So they were able to hide a lot of this stuff. They were literally bombarding everybody with the war. They weren't talking about this at all. They did it right under our noses.
Now, for anybody out there, I hope there are some people out there who have worked in large scale industries like factories that are producing various components or complete things, whether they be vehicles or engines or whatever, and you're familiar with how these places are often laid out and tooled and so on and so forth, so that we can kind of keep that in mind when we look at this whole narrative about all of these various companies, certainly all the car companies, which would include International Harvester and the Big Three, and see if that could even begin to make sense in reality. Now, I've worked in two situations in my life that were, and I've worked at actually a lot more factories than this, but they were making very certain specific components. And one of them was a place that essentially made ducts for like HVAC. And the thing is, a lot of those machines I remember working on, they were set up and specifically designed and tooled for certain sizes of ducts, whether they were rectangular, round, or anything like that. All the pieces, components, and everything else were for certain sizes. If they wanted to introduce other sizes, they would have had to change so much about their machinery. They would have either had to add new lines if they still wanted to make the other sizes, or they would have to either completely adjust everything, which a lot of those machines, you can't just adjust them. They're designed to make certain sizes in certain ways, and that's what they did. You'd have to oftentimes, in many situations, build new machines to make these new parts. I mean, remachining any sort of factory situation is daunting.
It's monumental.
But they would have us believe that all of these car manufacturers, and we're just talking cars, we haven't even gotten into trains, ships, airplanes, or anything else, that all of them retooled all of their factories to make things for the war. And they get ridiculous with some of the things that they say these places made. At least in the case of International Harvester, they say they only made a few different vehicles and maybe engines. The other companies, it gets so much worse that those would have to be their own briefs. Go ahead, Hannah.
I just thought of this. When I was at Tesla, and I believe I can talk about this now because it's been so long. I was actually in the stator department, and I just looked up what that. Basically, it's a huge component in the motor or generator, stator, and it uses copper. And I'm just wondering. I have a question. Are they making parts so inefficient these days that uses too much copper, too many, and they're just so inefficient? Because I've never seen more copper in my life. And where are they getting these? Where are they sourcing their supply? There has to be certain mines today supplying these companies with copper and all of this material. There's just no way that they can shut down everything.
And that's what I wonder. So, for instance, and I know this isn't copper mines, but I think it's close enough for this to be used as an example. When I've gone up to the UP, I managed to find a tour in an iron mine, an old iron mine. And it was really cool, but of course the tour guide made sure that, he told us that the reason that so many of these mines in the UP were closed down is because, check this out, after World War II, the price of iron tanked. Not to be punny, but he said the price of iron was so bad that if companies weren't producing, like if they couldn't find ore in their mine that had a certain amount of purity, they'd have to shut down their mine. And he started going through just a small list of all of the mines in the UP alone. So we're not talking about Wisconsin, we're not talking about Minnesota, we're talking about just the UP that were shut down because of the price and because their iron wasn't pure enough. But the thing is this, if you start taking into consideration the sheer number of mines they say that existed in the UP, and we're only allowed to get anywhere near or to tour a couple, how do we know that they're still not pulling out extremely pure iron ores for uses elsewhere and shipping them out? I mean, the Great Lakes shipping alone has been changed so much, and there's so much security. And I found this out just from taking pictures of the footings of a bridge in Presqu'Île, right next to Marquette. The security is outrageous. We don't know if all of those copper mines, they said they closed down almost every single copper mine in the Keweenaw Peninsula. And I have a real hard time with that. All at once. Because they said they just weren't producing. All at once? That's where they're getting their copper. Because remember, Michigan, the Keweenaw, and surrounding areas has some of the best copper and still does in the world. It's called native copper. Why is it called native copper? It's called native copper because this copper up there is so pure, you don't even have to refine it. You can take it and make it into anything you want and skip the whole smelting, refining process. That's how good it is.
Here's my theory with that. I think they're all, or a lot of them are still active, and I think they're transporting guys or teams of people, and they don't know where they are. They're transporting them to these places, and it's high security. They don't even know where they are. I think they're told they're in a certain place, but they don't know, and it's probably a lot underground, I'm assuming. So they go and they work, and then they get transported back after their shift's done, and they only work maybe a week or 2 weeks, and they have a couple weeks off.
Sure thing.
I think they literally have convinced people that these mines are in a certain place, and they've convinced them that they're in a certain area. They can't leave. They have everything there that they need, like food, living quarters, and they've convinced them that they're in a place that they're not.
And resources like that are oftentimes considered a matter of national security.
Yes.
So they can tell all of these guys that they're transporting there, that they can't talk about this, that, and the other. They have contracts, and they probably spy on them too, to make sure they're not talking about this, that, or the other, So is it doable? It's highly doable. Highly, highly doable.
If they're getting paid good and they have everything they need and they're lazy and they're selfish, yes, they're going to just do what they're told.
They don't care. They
No.
don't care.
No.
They don't care where they're going or what they're doing. And yeah, do you have any idea how many guys out there who, I don't know, let's say they just were raised in a blue-collar life and they've been kind of watched, because that's why they keep such extensive files on people, because they want to know what kind of personality they have. Are they somebody who has a problem with conscience, or are they somebody who can just do what you tell them and they don't need to talk about it, they don't care that much about it? Because those are the kind of people that they want to use. They're smart enough to where they're better than maybe others that they could use and don't want to, but they just don't care enough to where they have no worries whatsoever that they're going to be out telling people about very sensitive things. Those are the kind of people that I believe they can employ in things like that, you know? They could tell people, you know, you want a really, really good job? That's this high security thing. Maybe they go somewhere and they get a series of interviews. And by the time they get to their last interview, that last interview is basically determining whether or not this person can tell their friends, their family, and whoever else that they're going up to the Alaskan pipeline for 90 days at a time and working up there on the pipeline, when in reality, they're going and pulling native copper out of the ground, or they're going and pulling that super rich, super pure iron out of the ground of the Upper Peninsula in Wisconsin and parts of lower and mid Minnesota. And look, if a guy with no education at all is making more in a year than, say, an RN, like, let's say he's making twice as much or more, they're going to jump at it. And some of these jobs, you know, I would get amazed when people would tell me about them that have worked certain kind of jobs, like guys who have worked on Mississippi and Ohio barges, which you don't just walk into that. I mean, a lot of times they make it seem like you can just walk on to these jobs, but there tends to be a lot more to it. And I have heard far more stories about the human resources people at a lot of these places, whether we're talking about mills, Great Lake freighters, Mississippi, Ohio, Illinois River barges, things like that, that the human resources people can just take your application, if they feel like it, and just slip it right down to the bottom of the pile, right down to the bottom of the pile. In fact, that's like a proverb in the mills, is how often they do that. How often those guys in human resources move applications to the bottom of the pile, and how often they move applications to the top of the pile. Done all the time. So believe me, they're still hiring the people that they think are the right people. And hey, who knows, you know, like I said, these sensitive jobs that are already probably considered national security stuff, right? They're watching these people. You know, I'm not saying they've got all their phones tapped, they're listening to every conversation, but they're watching them. They're watching them through different eyes, you know? And if they see that they're becoming a little weak, they're unhappy, they're talking too much, even to their coworkers and all that, that's when they have an accident, you know? A 10,000 pound ladle accidentally falls on their head. You know, they accidentally fall off the barge and are unable to be rescued. You know, things like that. They have accidents.
I actually earned, what do you call it? Oh my goodness, I totally had a brain fart. I earned stock in Tesla when I worked at Tesla. They took it away for some inexplicable reason towards the end there. I
Just
earned
took it
about
away.
$4,000 and they took it away. For some technical reason. Don't know why. I was very outspoken at the time. I shouldn't have been. I was stupid. I was very stupid.
That sort of thing happens all the time too. And so this is what I'm saying. So here's the thing. You can look this up yourself, but they say, even though International Harvester USA, and we don't know what their other plants, which it appears they might have had other plants in other parts of the world, including Germany, might have made. Maybe. That might just be part of the story for why they had so much in existence by World War II. Oh, they had plants here, there, and wherever that somehow inexplicably weren't in existence anymore after the war. They say that International Harvester made 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we'll say 7 various vehicles, we'll say, during the war. They said they created this M14 half-track, and they call this an anti-aircraft vehicle. Now, if while I'm talking about this, Hannah's going to go ahead and punch that into the Google image search, you'll be able to see at least the promo photos.
M14.
It's, yeah, M14 half-track. HALF-track. Yeah, and that's pretty close. Now, I've scrolled through a lot of these pictures, and besides for models and ones that exist today, which how hard would it be for them to create one of these and put them in a museum? I mean, how many of you guys have seen these things? You know, they never feature them in war movies or anything, and I believe that pictures like this, I'm going to have to keep this vertical too. I actually just looked at the first portion of this that we created, and I tried to do it in a landscape fashion, but it just turned everything sideways. So I'm going to have to flip everything and hope that works, which is going to be a total pain in the neck. I didn't realize that. But a picture like this, tell me that just doesn't look like a promotional photo. You know, they could have just retrofit a few things onto this, or this could have been a vehicle that was had by one army or another, you know, for some time, and they could have said, well, this is one of the IH vehicles that was produced. Remember, retooling that isn't easy, retooling that is remarkably difficult. I mean, things like this. Does that even look real?
We know nothing about where
With
these
the
were.
anti-aircraft gun on top. You think that anti-aircraft gun was part of this whole picture?
It looks
Come on.
silly.
It does. Looks very
'Cause
silly.
you're literally a target up there.
And then this is something more modern, which again, if they just create these things over a number of years and have them in parades or put them in a museum or show them here and there, then there you go. History was accurate, and here's supposed to be another one. But the problem is I'm not seeing enough of the pictures of them in context for me to believe it. That's the problem. Context. So the other thing that they were supposed to produce was something called an M1, and get this, it was called an M1 Garand, Garand.
Hold on, honey. M1.
M1 Garand, Garand rifle. Oh, yeah. So the good people over there at International Harvester were tooled themselves out enough to create this spectacular looking bolt action rifle. And I would imagine, even though I've never toured any of the gun or rifle manufacturers near me, that's a pretty big deal just to produce one highly accurate, high quality rifle. Now, they produce something called an M24, which is actually just an engine that they put in the M14. So really not much proof one way or another to that. The M36. And then something called an M56, which they say was a 2.5 ton 6-wheel drive military truck. They say it was used as a cargo truck, and that was the one that was mostly shipped to Russia under the Lend-Lease. So that would be the M56.
It doesn't look big to me, really, honestly. Is this what it's supposed to be?
Yep, that's the one. It basically looks, well, it looks a lot like a Jeep to me.
Yeah.
And again, I can scroll through it as I scrolled through all of these pictures, as I found out the things they supposedly were making during World War II. And mostly what I found was like newer models, which might be in a parade or a museum or something like that. And then maybe just actual models, photos that didn't look very convincing, or promo shots. And with this one, we're not even having much luck finding it in promo shots. The last thing was the probably the M425 and 426. And I believe these were the ones that were more standard. Let's see. Try that real quick. Oops, I got to put in IH to get that one. M. And this again was a truck. It was simply a truck that could have existed before, that they just fit it in certain different ways, put on a different trailer, painted it green, so on and so forth. I have a big problem with the idea that any of these companies could retool as much as they were said to have retooled in the amount of time that they would need to retool in order to participate in this war effort. So the last thing I wanted to do on this video, because again, there's more weird information on International Harvester than I can even begin to throw at you. It's ridiculous. The oddest thing about International Harvester is it actually ties in to what a lot of these, the fake and stolen history people, mostly shills, I haven't found too many that I think are authentic. They do, however, point out how strange it is that like one architect will be credited with designing so many different buildings at different World's Fairs that it's really not believable. And the funny thing about architecture and designing a beautiful building, that does not qualify you to design a tractor or a locomotive or a plane, a bus, or much of anything else. However, you're going to love this one. So there is a guy, and some of you might be familiar with him. I'm actually just going to punch in his name. I bet you his picture is going to come up. Let me see if I can punch in. Maybe we'll just go ahead. We'll just put in designs. So they say that all of the redesigned Farmall tractors, because we have every reason to believe that the Farmall tractors, all of them, were far better and of a different design before World War II, when they started making them worse and worse and worse. They actually credit Raymond Loewy with this, and I won't be able to scroll through every single picture, but you'll be able to find some of them. A lot of these pictures you're seeing on screen are things that they say Raymond Loewy designed, because they call Raymond Loewy the father of industrial design, and they say that everything he designed was Art Deco, and he was one of the most influential Art Deco designers there was, okay? So if you look him up, not only is he credited with all the new model Farmalls, so the A, the B, the H, and the M. Those are their four main models. But also, get this, he had time to design this little thing, you might have heard of it, called the Chrysler Building. Raymond Loewy is credited with not only designing the Chrysler Building, but models A, B, H, and M of International Harvester's Farmall tractors. And not just that, how about the Pennsylvania Railroad? He designed for them, and Studebaker, and logos. He had time when he went home from a busy day to sketch out a few logos you might have heard of. Now, when we punch this into Copilot, we got this whole slew of categories and things he designed within those categories. Hannah, what are those?
So, in the automobile section, and this is not exhaustive, the Studebaker Champion for 1939, the Avanti for 1962. I don't know if we'll have time to show all the pictures, but he designed these two vehicles. I'm assuming they're a vehicle. And then the Hupmobile styling, which I'm not sure what that is. We haven't looked that up yet.
Okay, that's one thing that I'm going to put in real quick just to see if we can get some pictures, because neither one of us understood what that meant. All right, We'll try Hupmobile styling and see if anything decent comes up. I'm assuming this sort of style of car is what they would tribute to him, Raymond Louis Hupmobile. So that first image that comes up is this. Raymond Louis Hupmobile Aerodynamic, 1934 to 37. So, besides for the Chrysler, I have to assume, well, first off, this car definitely has an inline engine. But so that's the thing. Before I start going into all of this, and that's gorgeous right there. You're not going to see anything quite like that.
So the 1950 style of vehicle is what that is called then, the Hupmobile?
Well, I'm assuming that, wouldn't this Stahl's motor and music experience. Now, what I didn't find out is whether all of these were manufactured by Studebaker or was Hupmobile its own car company. I thought it was a specific style, and Hannah's going to try to look that up. But here's what I would say. It could take a lifetime for a man to understand architecture well enough in such a complex way that he could actually be the man, even if he would have a huge team underneath him to oversee the design of the Chrysler building. But then overseeing the design of automobiles, to me that's problematic because there's so much you have to know about how an automobile works. All the aspects of how it works, what would be the best engine you were going for based on what, I guess, economic class you were going to be marketing to, safety features. I can't even begin. The electrical features of a car, the mechanical features of a car, like I said, safety features, what it's going to be made out of. You're going to have to keep in mind weight, because I'm sure these designers, they do think about these things. The weight of the materials, how much material can you put in a car that has this sort of engine, and just keep going down the line. And Raymond Loewy would have to know about all of these things before he just thought, I'm going to design a car. Unless they're, he just had the impetus of design, and then the good people at Studebaker or wherever, they fine-tuned it. Maybe. But they also credit him with 1, 2, 3 different locomotive engines. The design of 3 different locomotives. Go ahead, Hannah.
I did find out what it was. So Hupmobile was a car company. It was one of the many independent automakers trying to survive the Great Depression by hiring Lowry. I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name.
I'm not sure. Loewy?
Yeah. They hoped to stand out with a design that looked fast, even when parked. While the style was admired, it wasn't enough to save the company. It folded in the 40s. So it was that, basically the aerodynamic, two-toned Art Deco, they claim Art Deco style of the vehicles you just were showing.
And then we get into locomotives. So for at least 2 different car companies, at least. And like Hannah said, this isn't exhaustive. And so a lot of these trains you're going to see here, the design is connected with, again, this Raymond Loewy. Now, supposedly that's him standing in front of one of the trains he supposedly designed. I'm not sure. It looks a little Photoshoppy, which, of course, back then it probably wouldn't be Photoshop unless they had it. Yeah, go ahead.
that image there doesn't look like that train.
Not at all.
So I'm not sure why that's there.
I'm not sure if I've seen a real live train that looked quite like that sketch right there. These trains, I've seen images of these, though. These other ones that we're seeing here. So if they're going to credit that sort of style to Raymond Loewy, I've seen that sort of style, but it looks like they might be crediting a few different styles to him. But yeah, again, I guess you don't really have to know that much about trains to design a locomotive, do you? You don't have to know about things like all of the engineering that goes into a locomotive. You can watch the guy, and I think his name is Darren. He has a YouTube channel called Industrial Revolution, and he will talk to you about all of the fine-tuned engineering that has to go into designing a locomotive, and you wouldn't believe it. You would not believe it. The size of the wheels, based on how they run, they have to be certain sizes and certain bits apart. And then there's the width of the tracks they're going to be riding on. In America, they would be the widest. There's tons of engineering that goes into a train. And so does Raymond Loewy know about that? Or are we just supposed to believe he came up with the concept and then they fine-tuned it? I don't know. But how about aircraft? They also say Raymond Loewy was behind the design of some aircrafts.
Air Force One livery for JFK, which I have no idea what that is.
I'm going to try to punch that in.
You know, is it possible that he came up with the drafts of these, the images? The engineer would have had to make it viable, and then the men who put it together. Who's responsible for all that?
But why would they ever have an architect come up with that? You know, that seems a little ridiculous. You would think they would come up with it, and then they would ask him, you know, what do you think? Is there certain things we can do to this to make it more Art Deco? And then he would give it back to him, and they would say, can we use this or not? They're not saying that. They're crediting the designs of this. How about the Greyhound Scenic Cruiser? They say the interior. I don't know if they're going to have the interior or not.
Who are the
but just to
engineers?
design the whole interior of a bus is a big job. What did you say?
Well, I would think the engineer would be named because the engineer is the one who made it into existence. The engineer would be the one to fine-tune and tackle the problems of making it a reality. And then the builders. You're not going to name any of those men because it's not just one person to go into any of these projects. It's many.
Oh yeah,
you can't
always.
credit one person with these things because it's a team of men.
So that was what. And then he's credited with all kinds of corporate logos, by the way. Shell, Exxon, BP, Lucky Strike, TWA, Consumer Products.
Coca-Cola.
Yeah, or Sears, Cold Spot Fridge, Coca-Cola, you name it. So my theory was this, and we'll have to wrap this one because it's, like I said, it just kind of is blowing my mind. The more I look at it, the more information I get, and it's just ridiculous. I think the reason that you're going to find over and over again that they're going to credit so many things to one person is because in the fuzzy years when they were changing over so much, they decided that it would be far more expedient to take these huge amounts of different products made by a lot of smaller to mid-level companies and attribute them to, say, one umbrella company designs to one person, you know, and you'll see that over and over again, rather than to take all of this huge amount of different things that they had coming out of World War II and attribute them to the obvious, well, one man, one designer, or a team thereof per thing. Because then it would get so insanely huge they could never, ever hope to change over everything in even a decade or two. And that's why I believe that they do it like that.
He may have been responsible for redesigning certain logos, and I think they have all the records of who actually built everything, because I think they just took control of all the records. And
absolutely. Yeah, I believe that. All those records, they're not gone. They're just somewhere where we can't get to them. So, all right. This has been pretty much... well, I guess what we'll call this is probably something having to do with the International Harvester, and this will be episode 1 of a number of episodes, and we will see you very soon with episode 2. Until then,